Morning, everyone. It's Mrs. Everett. I wanted to go over this colonization impact chart with you so that you could review it and fill in any of the blanks that you don't have. Notice that the blanks that you had on your sheet are in red, so make sure when I go through that you check these. If you need to pause the video, go ahead and do that. You'll see that I have this broken up into the three countries that we talked about: Spain, France, and England. And then at the top, it's broken into four categories. First of all, we have reasons for exploration, which are the whys. Why did these countries come to the North and South America to explore, to set up colonies? What were they here for? Why were they driven to do this? Then you're going to see the areas explored. And they didn't cover those very much in the video, so I didn't have you fill any of those in. But you are going to want to look at those because it's going to give you an idea of where we see the lasting impacts of the colonization of these different countries. You can probably already tell, when we talk about language, you're going to see that connection in these areas. And then we have it broken down into negative impacts and lasting positive impacts. Remember, we've talked about all year that when we make decisions, there are always positive consequences and negative consequences. And this is a reflection of that. Colonization is no different. There were positive consequences of the colonial period and the things that happened during that time. But there are also negative impacts, things that happened that left negative things in these areas that we need to be aware of. And actually, you're going to be looking at these two next week with a writing assignment that you're going to be doing with this. So make sure you take note of these two areas and make sure you keep your chart. Do not turn this chart in. You're going to need it next week. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started talking about these. Let's start with Spain. So reasons for exploration, the big ones right here: wealth and power. Wealth is money. We know that, especially in some of these areas, Mexico, Central and South America, there was a lot of gold and silver. And the Spanish took advantage of that. They gained tremendous wealth from gaining that gold, taking it back to Europe, and being able to buy lots of things with it. And the two are related because with wealth comes power. You can buy armies, you can build better and stronger ships, you can expand your empire, you can pay more soldiers. So with wealth comes power, and that was the ultimate goal, was to gain more power in Europe. And then we have religion, and specifically for the Spanish, it's the spread of the Roman Catholic Church. They wanted to convert people to the Roman Catholic Church to have more followers of their religion. The last one here is nationalism, and you're going to see this one on all of them. And that's not a word that we've talked about, but it is an important one, and it's pretty simple to understand. It means competition with other nations. Just as our school might compete with other schools, especially during this time in Europe, countries were competing with each other to be the most powerful, to have the most wealth, to say they had the most colonies. And so these three countries, especially Spain, France, and England, were highly competitive with each other. And these colonies was one of the ways that they competed, who could have the most and who could gain the most wealth and power from them. Then you have the areas explored. As we talk about the language and obviously it being Spanish, you'll see that a lot of these areas are impacted by that. Mexico, even Florida in the southwestern United States, Central and South America are all impacted by Spanish. Mexico, Central South America, that is the language that's spoken. In Florida and the southwestern US, it's English, but there's a strong Spanish influence. Negative impacts. Okay, the first one is slavery. Slavery was begun when in North and South America when the Spanish started using, in the beginning, Native Americans as slave labor to harvest the gold and the silver and other resources from the land. As the Native American population died off, partially because of the second one here and just the hard labor, that is when we start seeing the impact of the Columbian trade and bringing of slave labor from Africa. The second one I kind of just hinted at, diseases. Sadly, this is something that we probably understand a little bit better now. There were lots of diseases that Europeans brought with them to the New World that the Native Americans had no immunity to. And so there was no way, there was no vaccine, nothing to prevent these Native Americans from getting very sick. Smallpox was one of the big ones. And so it's estimated, we don't have an exact number, but it's estimated that close to 90% of the Native American population died as a result of the diseases brought over with Europeans. So this was an unexpected impact. The Europeans had no idea this was happening, but it did. And it really affected the Native American culture. And then horses. You're actually going to see that horses are on both sides. They are on negative and positive, and that's for a very specific reason. Horses were a negative thing in the very beginning because horses are not native to the United States or South America. They were brought with the Europeans, and they were used to defeat many of these native groups. It was one of the reasons that even though some of these European countries had less soldiers, they still defeated these Native Americans pretty easily because of horses and the weaponry that they had. But they become a positive pretty quickly once Native Americans learn how to use them. Once Native Americans figure out how to domesticate and train horses and ride them, they then become a positive for them because they have become, some might even argue, more skilled on horses than some of the Europeans. All right, so let's go back to the top here with the positives. Spanish is the language that was brought by the Spanish, obviously. There are some words here that we have in our current vocabulary, English vocabulary, that come from Spain. You also have place names like the Rio Grande, San Antonio, Florida that name came from Spanish language, so we can trace all of that back to Spain. The religion we kind of already talked about, Roman Catholic. A lot of these areas today, Mexico being one, is still extremely highly Roman Catholic. I think the last data I saw was like 80% Roman Catholic. So you can still see a very close connection between those two things. Crops. One of the things that I don't think the videos talked about much either was what resources came from Europe to the Americas. Because there were a lot of food crops that we now rely on that came from Europe and we would not have without colonization. So you'll see here we have wheat, sugar cane, which is what we get sugar from, and your citrus fruits, your oranges, lemons, limes, things like that. We talked about horses and then domesticated animals. Once again, cows, pigs, chickens, probably our three favorite protein meats, came from Europe. These things were not here prior to European colonization. So you can thank the Europeans and colonization for your burgers and your sausage and your chicken tenders. All right, let's move on to France. And some of these are going to be the same. So we'll try to go a little bit faster here. So once again, wealth and power. This is the number one driving of all three, to be honest. And then you have religion, which with the French is also the Roman Catholic Church, same religion as the Spanish. And then you have that nationalism, competition with each other. Mostly for the French, we're talking about the St. Lawrence River area in Canada, the Great Lakes region, so even northern parts of Ohio. I know you guys talked about that in 4th grade social studies. And then along the Mississippi River and the southern part of Louisiana. In fact, New Orleans in itself has a highly related relationship with French culture. If you've ever been there or studied New Orleans at all, you can see that. Negative impacts, diseases. We've talked about this. Every single European group that came brought diseases and had a huge negative impact on the native groups. Another one for the French, though, is specifically fur trade, because the French came not so much for gold. They didn't make their wealth from gold and silver like the Spanish. They made their wealth from fur. Europe was crowded, very, very, very crowded. So animals like beavers and things like that they made their fancy hats out of and coats out of didn't really exist much in Europe anymore. They had really run a lot of them off, but they were all over the New World, especially in these regions, these northern regions. So they traded with the natives for furs in exchange for guns and manufactured goods. And then what are our lasting positive impacts? We have the French language. Prairie is a word that comes from the French. And you'll see pockets of French language within the United States and Canada. Canada has 2 official languages. I don't know how many of you knew that, but Canada has 2 official languages, one being English and one being French. So all government business in Canada is actually done in 2 languages. And if you've ever been to Canada, you've probably noticed that their signs and things are usually in 2 languages. Place names, you have Louisiana, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, which all are in that Louisiana region at the bottom, at the end of the Mississippi River. And then religion, once again, Roman Catholic. England is where we see a little bit more difference. Some of the things are the same, but there are some more differences here. You still have wealth and power as a motivation. They wanted gold, but the regions where they settled, there wasn't as much gold. But they found that some of the crops and things that they got access to were actually ended up being way more valuable than the gold and silver. Religion. This is different. This is important to note. There was a lot of religious turmoil going on in England during this time. There was a fight between the Catholics and the Protestants and other religious groups. And honestly, people in England were just fed up with their kings and queens not being able to make a decision about what religion they were going to follow. So a lot of people that came to the New World came here to be able to choose what religion they were going to follow rather than be told what religion they were going to follow. And you see that reflected in our Constitution, and we still have that today, that we can choose or choose not to follow whatever religion we see fit. So that is a huge impact right there. And then that nationalism again, even though there were some different motivations, they were still competing for that wealth and power. Areas explored, you have the Hudson Bay area in Canada. There was some competition with the French for some of those Canadian areas. And then obviously our original 13 colonies that then spread into places like Ohio and regions farther west as we go through American history. Negative impacts. We've talked about diseases many times, but we can't say it enough because it was a huge native impact to the Native Americans. Tobacco. Some people might argue with me that this could be in different places, but the introduction of tobacco and the amount of growth that was done in the southern states with tobacco led to the creation of the tobacco industry and tobacco addiction. So for me, that's a negative. And then guns, the introduction of guns. Once again, we could argue this, but this kind of affected that Native American population like diseases as well. They were used to decimate this Native American population. Then we have positive impacts. Lots of things, especially since, this is the one we were the most affected by. Laws and government. This idea of self-government, governing ourselves, and the people having a say in their government actually comes from England. And then we use those ideas to eventually declare ourselves independent and create our own nation. So very important ideas coming from England with these colonists of how to govern ourselves. Written laws, this idea that we should write laws down and have a place where they can't be questioned. The right to disagree with your government. This is a big one. Keep in mind that most of these countries, actually all 3 of these countries, have monarchies at this point in time. They have kings and queens who you really can't disagree with. You do what they say, or you're going to be in big trouble. So, but this was starting to form in England, this right to have a disagreement with the government and ask questions and say, but why? And obviously we see this as a huge part of our government today. Obviously the language is English. That's what we speak. We see this as a huge impact on our country today. Place names like New England, New Jersey, New York. Obviously New England is the New England. New Jersey, there was a place in England called Jersey. So New Jersey is people who came from England in the Jersey region formed New Jersey in the New World. Same thing with New York. There is a region in England called York. So people that came from England, from the York region, settled in that area and named it New York. Religion. This is very different than the other groups. Religious diversity was big. So it wasn't one specific religion. Lots of different religious groups came to these regions from England because they wanted to be able to have that freedom of religion and practice whatever religion they felt necessary. But you do have a big surge of these Protestant churches because that had been an issue in England for quite some time, the battle between Protestant and Catholic. And so some of those Protestant groups did decide to come to the New World. And then cash crop agriculture, this idea of growing crops to sell for profit. So that tobacco and cotton, the fact that those crops are going to be huge money makers. And like I said, in the long run, actually end up gaining England more wealth than some of the gold and things that Spain gained. It just took longer. But once they realized that these crops grew well in the southern portion of the United States, they made a lot of money off of them. So this is kind of an overview of the chart and some of the main key elements that you need to understand about colonization. So make sure you get this filled in and hold on to this. Do not turn this chart in. You will need this for your assignment next week. All right, I hope you enjoyed learning about this, and I will talk to you later. Bye.